vital that you make sure that the camera cares about you and not the people walking in the room. But protecting your data is the #1 job of every DBA. The reason that your data is so important and your data is so valuable, you need to protect it. And that means having a backup every day, having a backup that you've tested periodically, that you've actually done restores. You need to understand that. And what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about starting with getting a backup plan, then moving on and adding after imaging to that, and then ultimately adding replication to that. And you may say, we don't need replication. And that's a reasonable decision to make, but you need to make it out loud. And you need to make it out loud in a room full of people who have stakes in that data, because there's a trade-off. And those trade-offs are very important to understand. So here's White Star, that's who we are. The good news is OpenEdge is incredibly reliable. I've seen people turn off power. I've seen people do everything you possibly can to break a database. And the vast majority of time, and I'm not talking about 99%, I'm talking about 99.9% of the time, the database just comes up. And that is a testament to how damn good the database is. So I'm very database focused here. And I'm going to talk about the database, but your database isn't the only thing you care about. You have to care about everything in the environment. You have to care about the application files. You have to care about the OS you're on. You have to care about all of those things, because the database doesn't run in a vacuum. And that's where people tend to make a mistake. They have amazingly good plans to back up their database. But how about if you don't have the right version of Progress when you restore it? How about if you don't have the right version of the OS when you restore it? You're out of luck. And in the United States, I have to be able to restore a database from 7 years ago and be able to accurately describe what that database looked like exactly at that time, so the IRS can audit me. So if I have any financial data in there whatsoever, I have to have 7 years worth of data. And that means, do you remember what operating system you were on 7 years ago? Probably not. There's things that have gone completely under since then. There's other things that have just had big problems. So what we need to do is I need to make sure that when I do my annual backups, I'm including everything, including a description of the physical hardware I have. I may have to scramble to get that reassembled to be able to get a restore. But you'll be able to do it. It may be painful, but if you take the steps I'm going to outline here, then you'll be much more successful, or at least you'll have a chance of being successful. The bad news is, if you're complacent, and everybody is, they don't do all the steps. They don't consider all of the items they need to back up with. So what I want to do is get you to understand and visualize what's on your system, and then be able to make a reasonable plan to back that up. Progress has a lot of good backup options, but they don't complete the process for you. Online backup is great, but it doesn't back up my AI files. It doesn't know anything about AI files. I can't restore and roll forward if I don't have those AI files. So how do I make sure that I remember all of this stuff? Everyone thinks, oh, why do I do a backup? Well, so I can restore it. Well, no, I'm protecting the data. I'm protecting the data from all of the bad things that could happen during the day. I can have a hardware failure. I could have a piece of corruption happen. I could have someone malicious come into my environment and do something to my database. They change everybody's last name to Smith. You can't undo that unless you can roll forward to a point in time just prior to that happening. So your goal is twofold. One, you're trying to eliminate data loss. So the best thing you can do is keep reducing that. Keep reducing the data loss. So doing a backup once a day means that you care about 23 hours and 59 minutes of your data. That's how much you can lose, because you're going to crash the minute before your next backup. So how can I mitigate that data loss? And we'll talk about after imaging that does that. But it requires that you have a good backup policy. It requires that you have good procedures. We'll talk about how to do backups and how not to do backups. And then after we talk about after imaging, we're going to talk about replication, because we've talked about reducing data loss by having after imaging. You can reduce data loss and time to recovery with replication, because I don't have to restore a tape. I don't have to roll forward my AI files. So I can do all of that very, very quickly, and I can move to my replicated environment, and I'm right up to the last transaction. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's even more of a beautiful thing when you say, I need to do an operating system upgrade. And I know I need to reboot the machine, but I want to take the shortest outage as possible. So what I do is I switch from my primary machine to my target. I then do my hardware change on my primary machine. Then I reverse roles again, and I roll back over to there. That allows me to do that in very limited downtime and with no data loss. And the users will notice that, because they only care about, is the system available? They don't care about anything else, really. Is it available, and is it as fast as it can be? And we deal a lot with performance problems. I'm not going to talk about the performance problems here, but I will talk about when you're building a replication environment, you do need to consider how much hardware you're going to invest in that environment. Ultimately, the best thing you can do is duplicate what you have in production. But sometimes, for monetary reasons, you decide, I'm going to use a portion of that. I'm going to have good storage, I'm going to have an okay machine, and I may not be able to support the whole environment. But again, that's a decision that you can make with the stakeholders in your data. The biggest thing about this is you need to communicate from the beginning with those stakeholders. You don't need to have this conversation after a crash, because it's the worst time. Everybody's keyed up, everybody's doing the wrong thing. But if you said, yep, we decided that we were going to have a much smaller machine and that we were only going to allow the people who are customer facing to have access to it, no reporting, no anything else, and then we'll roll back after that. If you said that beforehand and you do that, no one's going to question you. Well, actually, yes, they are going to question you. But you'll at least have an answer that says, here's this thing that we did, and I wrote this down so you know. So it's important to just have the conversation up front rather than down the road. So you're protecting the data. This is why you do a backup. And people don't think about all this other stuff, but it's from corruption, and corruption can happen in a lot of different ways. There's human error that can cause corruption. I can install a bad piece of code into production, and that can cause an error. And if I'm just mirroring the data, and I do this bad transaction, what am I going to end up with? The same thing with 2 copies of it. So I got 2 copies of bad rather than 1 copy of bad. So the only way you can protect yourself is with after imaging and replication to be able to get around that problem. Again, we're trying to be quick about how fast we can recover and reduce the reduce the amount of data loss that we have. Those are the 2 goals that you have to think and keep foremost in your mind when you're developing these systems. So, corruption. I'm talking about hardware, software failure, user error. Mostly it's going to be bad code. If you don't have good, I'm going to test in production. Because we don't have a development environment. And that's a decision people have made. They said, I don't want to have a development environment because it's too expensive. But then they test in production, and that can be even more expensive. So a lot of times I can make people enjoy getting a brand new development environment because I can scare the bean counters enough to say that's important to you. And they understand that. So make a case for it by saying, I'm doing this as part of our data protection. It's not that I want to have a development environment. I want to protect my data, and that's how you do it. A malicious intruder. The data loss, if you lose a storage component, a database disk, a before image disk, an after image disk, you need to be able to recover from that. Loss of a backup. People don't think about this. It's like I'm putting backups sometimes on tape. I don't use tapes very much anymore, but some people still do. But you're putting on a piece of tape. It's almost the least reliable thing you can put it on the planet. But it's cheap, so that's why we do it. But if you back it up to some other piece of hardware, some other piece of storage that's not residing in the same location, then that's a better option. You lost the machine through fire, flood. We have hurricanes. America's a basket case of bad things that can happen. Just look at our legislature. Oh, never mind. Malicious intruder. This is the person with bad code that I most worry about at my office. And this is the person who's going to say, I'm going to test in production. And he does at our office. What to back up? I've got to back up the database. I've got to back up the operating system. When I'm talking about the operating system, I'm talking about all your user files, all your printer files. Your users may have files that they save on disk. I can't tell you the number of times that I've come up after recovery and someone goes, all my reports are missing. Yeah, because no one thought that we had to back up Becky's reports. And Becky never thought she had to back up her reports. So that's part of your responsibility, is to know that Becky has reports and you need to back them up. And I don't know why her name's Becky, but there's other application data. A lot of applications out there, like they said this morning, you're not running in a silo. You're running with a bunch of other things that are all feeding each other, and you need to back them up, and they all need to be synchronized somehow, and that's really hard to do. How do I synchronize this? And people are going to go, oh, I know, I've got a secret solution you've never heard of, Adam. And I'm going to say, I've heard of it, and I know it's broken. And that's what happens is people are going to tell me about they use snapshots. How many people here use snapshots? Excellent. One honest person. You can't Right, you use snapshots. You don't use it for databases. And why don't you use a snapshot for a database? You don't know if you can get it back consistently. Why is that? It's not aware of what's running, and that's exactly correct. I'll buy you a beer tonight. Well, I'll buy a lot of beers tonight. But the reason it doesn't understand that, the reason it can't understand that, is the most current data you have on your system right now is sitting up in memory. Yes, go ahead. Can I use ProQuiet and a snapshot? Yes, you can. And no, you shouldn't. Okay? So thank you for helping me. He'll be presenting here tomorrow. His answer is exactly correct. You shouldn't ever use a snapshot to back up progress data. The Quiet does do the right thing. It synchronizes all the changes down to disk. And then you get a backup. The problem is that it does it block by block, and blocks might change underneath it, and you don't know those changes have happened during the snapshot. It's supposed to be an absolute perfect image of that, but it's not really. And one of the other things they say about those type of backups is that it doesn't cause any performance problems. Okay? I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Military intelligence. Let's talk about those things that don't exist. What the problem is that you have to take all of this big glob of data and put it somewhere, and that's going to create I/O. And if you're running on traditional spinning disks, that I/O is going to cost you dearly. And what people tend to do is they say, I love snapshots so much, I do 10 of them a day. So they do the first snapshot. 2 hours later, they do the second snapshot. But it hasn't gotten the data from the first snapshot back to disk yet. So then it does the second snapshot. Now I've got a backlog that I'm never going to catch up with. And performance just grinds and grinds and grinds to a halt. So your job as the DBA is to do no harm. And snapshots do harm. And they constantly do harm. So you want to stay away from the snapshots. But when I'm backing up stuff, I look at application files, other application data, but the bottom line is basically everything. People want an image of their system. So if you did a snapshot to pick up just user files, okay, that's probably going to be okay. Because the user files are not that dynamic. I'm not going to have as many changes. So I probably could do that. I wouldn't want to do 10 of them a day, but I would maybe do that once a day. So we have to look at this and say, what are we going to back up and when? The database file is made up of the .dn, the .db, the .st file, .b1 through bn, .a1 through an. So I've got all of these files out there, and if I start using operating system commands to back them up, you always forget after I do some maintenance, I had to add some space, and I didn't have any room in that file system, so I added it in another file system, and I forgot to update my backup. So now I have my D1 through DN minus D3. So I can restore everything except the .d3 extent. How good is your backup then? Exactly, it's garbage. So what we need to do is, I'm encouraging everybody to always use Pro Backup. Pro Backup is way superior. And this is the reason for the not do a snapshot. When it's up in multi-user mode, you have all of those changes sitting up in shared memory. And you don't know when Progress is going to write them. Progress is going to write them whenever it damn well feels like it. And the reason is because it does a lazy commit. So the commit happens, the user is allowed to go on, the BI file is updated, but at some point in the future, that block may or may not get written to disk. And it may not get written to disk. The next time you start up, the BI file will actually update the block on disk. So don't think about, oh, I got a backup, and that BI file doesn't mean anything because I was shut down at the time. No. It looks at that BI file and cares dearly about what's in it. So make sure that you always back up the BI file. If it's 0 length, it wouldn't matter, but anything else. They don't account for this change. So all those snapshots, Veeam, and all these other ones, they don't account for shared memory. They don't account for the changes. They may work, and that's the worst part, is they may work. One second. What happens is I back it up, I restore it, I test it, and I test the data I care about. I didn't test the data that JC cares about. And JC comes in and goes, oh, does a query? And it's like, record doesn't exist. How's that? And it's because his transaction hadn't committed in the blocks that I got on disk. So it's very, very important to make sure that you don't use these things because they will not give you a valid backup. People say, I tested it. You didn't test everything, I guarantee you. Okay, how does OpenEdge backup, how does Pro Backup work? Oh, before I go on. Yeah, you had a question. That's an excellent point. People say vMotion is a great thing, and it still has the same problem as a snapshot because vMotion is essentially just moving a snapshot over. And so you're getting the same thing or the same problems with a snapshot that you get with a vMotion. And the only way you can make sure that a vMotion works is that everything has to be down. If you're down, not quieted, down. Or if you're quieted for the entire length of the vMotion, then I would believe that would be relatively safe. I still wouldn't want to do it. I'd rather be shut down because I want everything to be synchronized down physically to disk. And I'm really sure that a quiet point does that, but I'm positive that a shutdown does that. It's the state. You're talking about state, and how I'm not capturing a state accurately with a vMotion. I'm capturing the state with a vMotion if everything is completely static. And the only way I can guarantee that everything's completely static is by shutting it down. So yeah, it's a great point. And people say they do that all the time. Oh, we vMotioned, it was fine. And again, it's because I tested my data. I didn't test JC's data. Because I don't care about JC's data, really. He's my boss, but I don't care about his data. Okay, but what happens with an online backup is it goes out there and it locks the database so people can't make changes. Then it synchronizes everything down from shared memory to disk. These slides are all going to be online. So you can have all these slides. You're allowed to take pictures too. But then you switch after image files. Then you do the database checkpoints, which synchronizes everything down. Then it goes up and backs up the BI file. You'll notice nobody can do any updates until that BI file is backed up. So if you have a big BI file because you have a long-running transaction, that's going to delay people and give them a longer pause on an online backup. But then it unlocks the database, it will allow changes, but it will grab the blocks that are modified before it allows the user to have that block. So I always have the most current copy of a block. So I'm capturing state. I'm capturing the accurate state of the database. And Pro Backup is the only thing that can do that. Anything else will not work consistently. What am I still missing? Well, I didn't back up the AI files. I didn't back up configuration files, properties files, SSL certificates, on and on and on and on. All of these things, I need to make sure. What else am I still missing? Oh, application files, other applications. Progress isn't running there by itself. I don't have the operating system. I don't have user files. So what I need to do is I need to have all of this stuff backed up. And then, and everyone's going to love when I say this, you need to test, restore it. And testing, no DBA likes to test. And I don't know why. We're all stubborn as mules. And we all say, I know it works because I know I did the right thing. But I don't want you to restore it. I want somebody else to restore it. Then you know it works. Because if it requires any of your knowledge to restore your database or your entire system, your backup is garbage. Because you could get hit by a truck. You could have some other problem where you became debilitated. That is not working in the best interest of the users, the data, the company, anything. And it's not working in your best interest either. You want to go and do other cool things, so give somebody else the crappy job of doing the test and pawn it off on them. So that's important. Make sure that you test this stuff because everybody needs it. Building a reliable backup plan. I think of it better as building a reliable recovery plan. Because how many times, JC, has your phone rang and someone says, I know I have a good backup, I just can't restore it. That's the reality, is people think, oh, I've got a backup. But they don't know what they did. They don't know how to restore it. Or they're inheriting something from somebody else. So you really need to make sure that you back up the database every day. I'd say you can postpone backing up other things and do those periodically, weekly or whatever. User files I would probably back up every day as well because I don't want to listen to Becky again about her reports. But I need to know about OS changes. And if I had a week's worth of OS changes in there, it wouldn't be a big thing. So I wouldn't care. So think about how frequently things change. And if they change very infrequently, you can back them up less frequently. But if they're very dynamic, they need to be backed up daily. If you're going to back up online, then you don't have a choice. You have to do a pro backup. And the way I do it is I back up everything with pro backup to disk, and then I do a sweep of everything I care about, all my daily backup stuff, with the progress backup and the supporting files on another piece of media. Either it's going to go across the network to another machine, or it's going to go and be backed up. The one thing you don't want to do is always overwrite yesterday's backup. Because what's going to happen is you're going to find out the problem with your backup, and you're not going to have the day before's backup to go to. So you're going to lose more and more data. Because I had somebody who had 75 days worth of backups, and they were all bad. But they had 75 days of them. So they'd never done that. What we want to avoid is snapshots, Veeam, vMotion, any of that stuff. That's not going to help you. You can do some files with that, but generally, let's stay away from them. It's the only way to back up online. You don't need to know where the database is. If the database file, I have to put that extra extent in a different file system because I ran out of space, no problem. Pro Backup will know it's there, and it'll back it up. So, but you need to make sure that you have that ST file somewhere so you can restore to that as well. You're completely unlikely to miss any database file because Pro Backup won't miss anything. It'll get all your data every time. The other thing I don't do is I don't do incremental backups ever. I don't think it's worth the benefit. The benefit of an incremental backup is you save some space. And it can be, if you have a huge database, it can be significant space. But two things, you complicate the restore process because now I have to rely on the full backup working and one or more incremental backups working, and I don't want to do that. If I have full backups every day, I use more space, I'm not doing appreciably more I/O, and I have a full copy of my database every single day, and that's what I want to do. That's what I do, and that's what we recommend to our clients. The AI files, in the world's best situation, you would have the AI files on a different piece of media than you have your database. Because again, what am I protecting with AI files? I'm protecting loss of a piece of media. So I could take yesterday's backup and roll today's AI files against it, or I could take 2 days worth of AI files and roll them forward. So I could get to current that way. That's your incremental. That can be your incremental. Yeah. We'll talk about the implementation and maintenance. When I implement AI, I always implement with variable length extents, all variable length extents, because I don't care about how big my extent sizes are. I don't care how big a particular extent size is. It doesn't matter. If I can get a unit of time in an AI file, that's fine. I always implement after image management every time because it takes care of all the tedious stuff I don't want to do, or at least most of it. So everybody out here, is everybody running after imaging right now? Who's running after imaging? Yay! Except for a few. But the people who aren't running, and it's surprising because this number has increased a lot. It used to be more rare that people didn't run AI, or more rare that people were running without AI. I look at that and I'm like, how do people run their system without AI? They have to care about their data. And I think if you care about your data, you have to do it. And you should be using after image management because it will do most of the work for you. Okay, it'll archive the AI files. The only thing it doesn't do is delete old archives. So you end up with a lot of files out there unless you clean them up. But that's a relatively simple thing to do. I can roll forward right to the last transaction, or I can roll forward to a point in time. And this helps where I put a piece of code in there and it updated everybody's last name to Smith. What time did you start running that piece of code? Well, I think it was about 12 o'clock. Okay, well, I can roll forward to 12 o'clock. And I don't have to roll forward the bad transaction. And of course, they were excellent coders when they wrote that piece of code because they made sure that each one committed individually. They didn't wait for the end to commit them all. So they got everybody changed to Smith, and even if you got it halfway through, well, now only half are named to Smith. Does that help? No, not really. So you really need to figure a point in time, and you can do that with the AI file. You can't do that with a progress backup. You can't do that with any other backup you have. You have to have after imaging. The AI file management, They don't auto-delete, so you can have a file system that grows if you don't manage that yourself. But it's, it's one line of code, so it shouldn't freak anybody out. Now that I've got a good backup policy and I've got after imaging enabled, I can go out there and implement replication. Replication is not free by any stretch of the imagination, but it's amazingly powerful because you can have 2 different targets that you write to. So you can go out there and protect your data more than once. So I can protect 1 copy locally and 1 copy over the WAN. So it's far away. In our case, we have hurricanes in Florida, but I don't have hurricanes in West Virginia. So I can have them far enough away that I don't worry about that. There's more resource usage because I'm now taking a copy of the AI notes and I'm applying that across the network to a secondary target. And that means I have to have reasonable network throughput. It means that I have to have a machine on the other side to get it, and I have to apply those AI changes to that. And it's another technical stack. One more thing you need to monitor, one more thing you need to be concerned with, one more thing you need to be proficient at. So that's what the downside is. How it works is that users go up there and they do the updates, and the updates go into the database file and into the AI file. The AI file notes are logged in the -pica, or pica, whatever you want to call it. When it goes into the -pica, the replication server knows which AI notes to read. It reads those notes and takes them, passes them to the replication agent. The replication agent applies those to the target database. So it's amazingly efficient. And people do surprisingly few updates. When you compare updates to the amount of reads they do, you're probably talking about 5%, maybe 10% if you're a heavy update user. So it's really a lot less traffic on that other side. The benefit of the less traffic on the other side is I can back up the target. I don't have to back up the source because the target looks exactly like the source, and an online backup on the target will look like an online backup on the source. So I can do that. Reporting can be moved off of the source onto the target. So there's another savings that you can give to your online users and who are sensitive to performance, and move things that are less sensitive off to this other thing. And SQL can be moved over there as well. This doesn't completely remove impact because you still have the notes coming across from the app replication server to the replication agent. And if there's not enough capacity on this side, you'll get a backup of logs out there. Set -pica very, very high. If you only have one or a few databases, I just say set it to the maximum, okay, which is 1 million. Or some rounded weird binary number near 1 million. Don't forget the hardware side. All storage should be mirrored. Every piece of storage should be mirrored. Anybody who says I have some drives that are not mirrored, they say, oh, we only put temp files out there. Okay, when that fails, what happens? My application users can't run because there's no temp file directory. So it's important that you have everything mirrored. Even if it's temp, it's got to be mirrored. Remote mirroring is a great option for the non-database files. Becky's reports, they're remotely mirrored. Redundancy for all critical points of failure. Network especially, if you go to replication, you want to have a second path to that host. And I have a client, they have a wide area network between Los Angeles and Tijuana, Mexico. Doesn't sound that good. But their primary path fails approximately monthly for some period of time. Then there's loud screaming in Mexican and in Spanish to each other. Then something might happen. But the whole time they're still replicating because they have a second path that goes down there, and that second path never fails. It's not as fast, it's more of an old school solution, but it works every time. This matters everywhere. If you're hosted, like AWS or Azure, it matters if you're on-prem. You have to have everything be redundant. And most of the solutions you get from AWS and Azure are automatically replicated or automatically mirrored. Okay, the one thing we haven't talked about is protecting important data. In the United States, we have Social Security numbers, and if anyone gives out my Social Security number, they can access all my banking information, they can access all this other information about me. So it's very important that it gets protected. And you hear about these break-ins all the time. Last week, there was a break-in at a major casino, and the sum total of work that it took was a 10-minute phone call. They didn't break through security. They didn't break through the firewall. That would be hard. They broke through the help desk. And they said, yeah, I'm working in this department, and I need you to help me. And they kept them on the phone, and they knew enough information, and they were on the phone for 10 minutes, and they had cracked MGM's network. So it's about people as well, people and policy. So this way, if they grab something that's at rest, they're very unlikely to grab something like memory because it's going to be too complicated to grab that. You're trying to make the pain of getting that data greater than the value of the data. That's all you're doing. So by having transparent data encryption, it's incredibly efficient. Progress claims that it's 2%. I think that they are vastly overestimating how much that costs. We've never been able to measure the cost of it. The big thing is when you have stuff encrypted out there, as long as your buffer hit rate is good, you only have to translate that one time. Because up here in shared memory, that's unencrypted. So your users are able to read it hundreds or thousands of times for free. They don't have to unencrypt it again. The only time I have to unencrypt it is when I'm pulling it from static storage into memory. So good buffer hit rates equal lower impact of TDE. So, and this is just a visual way of seeing that. It's I stole it right from the progress docs. I didn't go out there and try to make my own. What can be encrypted? And this is really important because the first time I saw TDE, I wanted to try it, and I said, well, I don't want to just go do one table. I'm going to do the whole area. But of course, all my areas are type 2 areas. And type 2 areas, you have to tell every object. That's the pain. You can't do an area you can't say, I want to do area 2 if area 2 is a type 2 area. You have to tell all the objects in that area. So it's up to you as to what you want to encrypt. You can encrypt just the table and not its index because it may be enough of a pain in the neck to unpack that themselves. So really, I think tables are really important, the tables that contain your specific data. Indexes I'm less enthused about. I don't think it's worth the pain for me. But there's people whose data is really worth a lot, and those people I think, yeah, I would do the indexes as well, and especially I'd just be more vigilant about my making sure I maintain a large big B to keep that stuff in memory. The BI file and AI files will automatically encrypt everything that's supposed to be encrypted, so you don't have to, you get that for free. Backup files, because they're containing the data and the data is at rest, they're encrypted there. So even if someone steals a backup, your data is still secure. So that's what you can do. The only thing you can't do is you can't do a whole type 2 area in one shot. And the easy way to do this is that I add encryption policy storage area, and that's just a tiny area that keeps all your encryption rules in there and everything like that. Then you enable the database for encryption, and if you don't, usually I start with the second step, and it goes, you don't have an encryption area, and then I go back and do the first step, and then do the second step again. But then configure your encryption policies, what you're going to encrypt, where, all that, and then and what cipher you're going to use. And you're going to create a passkey that you need to maintain. If you lose your passkey, you lose your data. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you have a passkey that you know and that nobody else knows. When Progress has a real security policy and we can store this stuff, it'll be a lot easier to do this. Right now, it's hard. And it's insecure because everybody goes, oh, I wrote it on the bottom of my mat in my desk, you know? I've got the passkey written on that. So once you've told it what you want to encrypt, then you have to go out there and encrypt that data. And it's a two-step process. One, you have to encrypt either the table name or index name or area name if it's type 1, and then you have to do a update. Once you do an update, before you do the update, those things will not be changed unless they get updated. Okay? So whenever it hits a block that needs to be updated, it'll actually encrypt that stuff on the fly. So you can allow it to do that if you're going to touch everything. But if you're not, then just run this update, ProUtil ePolicy Manage update. That will encrypt everything in that table or index or whatever. So that's the object that you're going to be doing. The best thing, first, start small. Have a real backup policy that you can restore, that's tested, that gets all the things you need, that can be restored by not you. Use hardware and other things to make your load a little bit less. That's a great way to do it. Then add after imaging. Once I have after imaging, that's mitigating the data loss portion of this. If I want to change the time to recovery, then I add replication, and that mitigates that downtime. Then I can also use TDE to further secure the data when it's at rest and when people have potential access to it. Because a lot of times, the clients that are doing backups now, and they're doing it on removable media, they're handing that over to a third party, and that third party is bringing it back to their safe, but it's out of your hands for a long time, and you can't guarantee its safety in that time. You'd hope you could, but you can't. That's all I have to say. When we were doing, I'll just tell one quick story, and it's a story, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use your company as an example. They have an incredibly amazing application, and each instance of it has 7 databases. The 7 databases, there's 5 that are fairly pedestrian and don't do much per day. They're important because I need them to run the application, but they're not doing massive updates. The other 2 are doing massive updates. We're getting ready to do this, and they host a lot of their clients. So every client they host is 7 databases. If they have a test environment, then it's 14. If they have a test and UAT environment, then it's 21 databases. They want to replicate that. The best way to do that kind of huge model of where you have a lot of things is don't start with your customers' data. Start with your own internal databases. I've got my database development data where I'm putting in changes and I'm doing all that stuff where I have to put it in. I'm doing check-ins and check-outs. I'm doing all that. I'm running Roundtable or something. Take those databases, replicate them first. This will allow you to learn, and the only people who are going to be mad at you are the ones right next to you. I know that doesn't sound better, but it is. So what you want to do is take the smallest chunk of this that you can at a time and build your technical stack that way. Then, once you've done that, then you can roll it out to 1 or 2 test instances. Then you can roll it out to everybody else. But you have to do it in these steps, and I can't explain how valuable it is to do it this way, and I can't explain how much less pain you will endure by doing it this way, because you're learning how to do all of these different things. And when you say, oh, I'm just doing a backup, well, no, you're not just doing a backup anymore. You're backing up Progress and these other applications and the operating system and all this other stuff. I need to know all that stuff. There's a big technical load to just do that. Then I'm adding after imaging. Okay, I've got all those AI files, I've got all the files, I need to make sure they're managed properly, I need to make sure I'm deleting the old ones, I need to Then I add replication. So now I've got more processes out there, I've got to monitor those, and I'm adding all these things. If I try to do that and I add 7,000 of them at a time, it's going to be overwhelming. But if I do it and there's 7 of them at a time, then it's easy, manageable, and you'll be successful. And that's the key to this. You want to do it so you can guarantee success. You want to do it so you know 100% of the time you can restore. And that's really the most important thing you can do. Does anyone have any questions? Comments? Personal problems? Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. If anyone has any questions about this, feel free to contact me. I'm Adam@wss.com, and we have a booth, and we're buying the beer tonight.